Okay, so up to 7 lakhs, 5%, 17,500 rupees tax saved under the new regime, angel tax abolished. But I think Dhiraj has already made reference, Sandeep, to the transaction tax, to the short-term and the long-term capital gains tax. Your big take, Sandeep Ghosh.
First of all, Barkha, the good part is this does not look like an interim budget or a budget of, as people say, a minority government, the government which is not sure. I think they are very, very clearly keeping the long-term perspective. They're not giving at all a sense that there is any degree of insecurity or something. The government has moved from its long-term vision to a short-term vision. I think that's very encouraging. I personally did not expect any freebies because I think the freebies, they will leave it to the states to tackle, like Maharashtra has already done. Similarly, if Haryana or people who are going into, and they would have focused on these two states, which they have done. As far as Andhra is concerned, it is to take care of Chandrababu Naidu's interests. And as Dhiraj said, his interest is mainly infrastructure because that's how he also looks at things. He is not a freebie-oriented guy. He is interested in building Amravati, etc. And Bihar, I would say, is from BJP's point of view, NDA's point of view, it is actually also an election budget. Because, Bihar, the last 2 terms of Nitish Kumar, there was not much development which happened. He built roads and bridges in his first term. But after that, there is not much of that development has happened. So putting these things in, I think BJP is also playing to its electorate. And all the other stuff is rather than just trying to appease Nitish over there. So that is, I think, fairly intelligent. Secondly, the employment bit. Employment is always a difficult one to tackle. Everything you talk about, skill development, etc., are not going to yield immediate results. So they had to manage the short term with the long term. Mr. Chidambaram, I believe, has taken a pot shot at Sitharaman for stealing his idea from the Congress manifesto. So be it. Sometimes you steal with pride. And, if it's a good idea, why not? The first part, which the ELI bit, which we were talking about earlier, I see that is going to essentially transfer some people who are on contractual labor into the company roles. Because one of the concerns people had is, about social security. That's not going to really create a tangible increase in number of people employed. What will happen in the apprentice scheme is to be seen, because apprentice scheme is actually a good thing to my mind, because all the new investment which is coming in, one of the problems is skilled labor. So unless you make industry participate in skill upgradation, all that talk about ITIs, etc., have been lip service for several years. Different governments have talked about skill development of the government. It doesn't really work. Now, if industry is incentivized to take on people and train them on the job, I think that will be a much faster solution, and it can yield quick dividends, or at least faster dividends than what the long-term stuff would really do. And this can get extended. I don't know whether Dhiraj can say whether this can get extended even to the service sector, or are we talking only about the manufacturing sector? Because unfortunately, manufacturing jobs, the labor intensity is coming down. You see, less and less people are being employed within the factories or plants because of automation. So unless you extend it to the service sector, you are not going to have a too high a multiplier effect. So those are, I think, fine prints to be seen.
Let me just read out Mr. Chidambaram's statement, since it did come up in reference, and then I'll come to Dhiraj and Yamini, and in that order. I'm glad to know that the Honorable FM has read the Congress manifesto Lok Sabha 2024 after the election results. I'm happy that she's virtually adopted the employment-linked incentive outlined on page 30 of the Congress manifesto. I'm also happy she's introduced the apprenticeship scheme along with an allowance to every apprentice, spelled out on page 11 of the Congress manifesto. I wish the FM had copied some other ideas in the Congress manifesto. I should shortly list the missed opportunities. All of these comments coming slowly from P. Chidambaram. Dhiraj, your thoughts?
I think employment.
Hang on. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I think, employment is the elephant in the room always, when you talk about budgets or economic policy, and I
Yeah.
don't think anyone has a full solution. So I think on the employment linked incentive schemes, I think there are three of them. And Sandeep, I think one is specific to manufacturing, but the other two, are neutral across sectors. So I suspect, but again, if you're and they're all EPFO linked. So if we believe that these schemes will transform the job landscape, I'm not sure. I think at the margin they definitely will help some of the young, and maybe some of the frustration will turn into aspiration. But I think a lot more needs to be done, and I think there again, typically this government over the last 10-11 years hasn't really announced the details of many of its policies in the budget speech. So they've said the economic policy framework will be announced, and they have plans for land, labor, capital market reforms. All of those are needed, but what is actually going to happen, we have to wait and see. I think on land they've said some interesting things on digitization and land records and so on, which is, I think, one step towards the bigger land reform question. But at land acquisition, they didn't mention that word. Those two words, I think, are still politically toxic. So I think a lot of because ultimately job creation will not happen with one or two schemes. I think you need a much more robust growth of manufacturing and the rest of the economy. You need to get people out of agriculture into the productive spheres of the economy. So I think that's going to require more work, and that's why I'm more keen to see some of the details on. There's a lot of intent in the budget, on employment, on MSMEs, but I'd like to see some of the, how these are rolled out actually in terms of policies or legislation. Some of the big ticket items in the past as well, like PLI, didn't come in the budget speech. A lot of it comes off budget. So let's see. But I think the impression one had so far is that the last 1.5 months, there hasn't really been much announcement or many announcements or much direction from the government on where it's going in this term. But at least now the budget has laid the ground, and looking forward to over the next few months to see how some of these things are detailed.
Right. Yamini, Mr. Chidambaram, former finance minister, has listed a whole bunch of things that he thinks have been inspired, copied from, whatever you want to call it, from the Congress manifesto. But that's politics. The end user isn't going to remember whose idea it was first. On employment, these employment-linked incentives, do you agree with Dhiraj that they don't really tell you very much at this stage?
No, absolutely. Look, I think at least we are arriving at a quote-unquote bipartisan consensus that employment is one of the most serious challenges that the Indian economy faces, that we have consistently delinked growth from jobs, quality jobs. And the one issue that wasn't mentioned in the course of the discussion around on the budget of the FM didn't mention it, is stagnating wages, which is adding to the overall sense of distress and stressing household budgets, especially in the informal sector and the rural sector. So, this is good. Good ideas should have bipartisan consensus, even if you don't get elected, if they are drawn on by the party in power. Perhaps we can go to the next important issue, which I think Parliament should be discussing, which is if the government is indeed going to present this employment policy or economic roadmap, as the FM said, let's have a special session on Parliament that actually debates this issue and centers jobs. After all, we've had special sessions of Parliament on things like the Women's Reservation Bill. Let's have a serious debate on the question of jobs. And I do think, I agree with Dhiraj that all of this is tinkering on the margins. There is a deeper structural challenge. I think that we have consistently seen some interpretations of how Modi's government has seen the challenge of employment or not seen the challenge of employment. They are very committed to the idea of seeing growth within the formal sector of the economy, and balance that out with the sort of cash transfer based welfare or in-kind based welfare transfer structure, without actively investing in the productive capabilities of people, i.e. health and education. In fact, where you see a little drop in allocations between interim and current budget, I'm told, is in the Samagra Samagra Shiksha, where you see about a 1% drop in overall allocation. But in any case, that has been huge gap areas. And then the assumption that capex will crowd in private investment, and miraculously this jobs, we'll have more jobs in construction, and the interim problem will be solved. The fact is that there's a structural challenge in the economy. It's not new. It's been in the making since we liberalized. It has always been a challenge. It is reaching a crescendo. It needs a really, really serious relook into the structural nature of growth, and a serious rethink in where and how we need to facilitate growth in order to address this challenge of employment. And all of these things are, in my mind, somewhat lipstick on a pig till we don't get to that. Could this economic policy that could well be debated in Parliament be this first step to a deeper engagement? And also, just one last point, none of this can be discussed seriously if we don't have a census. We do not know today what India looks like. We are basing our understandings very much on census data from 2011. We need data. We need a census. We need to understand migration patterns, urbanization patterns, in order to be able to sensibly and seriously build appropriate policy that can address the challenges we confront.
So actually, you've picked up two very political points. The census is a political point. The acknowledgement that there is a problem is a political admission. I don't see any special session. I could be wrong. I don't see this happening. But Amit, that's the crisis that I think you were saying is an unacknowledged crisis. Now, just looking at it through the prism of politics and not economics for a moment, I don't see the government saying, okay, we have a problem. We have GDP numbers, but there are no jobs accompanying it. There is a structural problem in the economy. I do not see this government, or to be fair, any other government actually coming out and saying that in so many words. I don't know which government would acknowledge that there is a crisis if we all agree that there is one. So in the absence of that acknowledgement, what would you be looking to see in the fine print? A lot of the fine print is not out. We're going to have to see where allocations have been cut, where they've been increased. We need a lot more detail. These are first reactions. What would you be looking for?
Are you talking to me?
Yeah.
So excellent question. Let me just link to Yamini's thing on the structural issue, and just say one thing on that. If you look at the CLEMS data that was released recently, right, and look at the labor productivity numbers, you see something very interesting. You compare it to, let's say, 2017-18, before the growth recession started and before COVID started. You find a lot of sectors like agriculture, food and beverages, trade, things that are surplus labor sectors where people crowd in for self-employment and so on. Their labor productivity in real terms is lower today than it was before 5 years. This is the opposite of growth, right? When we say growth, we mean growth in labor productivity. These are sectors that are lower in labor productivity. Now, this is what many people have been saying. Now, there is crowding into the surplus labor sector because there isn't jobs elsewhere. Where are the jobs going to come from? Look at three sources: corporate India, in which you talk about listed companies, non-listed companies, and then we've got the MSMEs. Most of the jobs come from MSMEs and not from the larger companies. Even in the corporate sector, and if you look at the non-listed companies, they are doing worse. We only have profits and sort of good performance at the top, where there isn't enough investment happening. So the government has been trying a lot of this public sector, capex going, though people have argued that a lot of it's a redistribution from public sector enterprises to, other capex and so on. We don't have to get into that. But I think this budget sends me a signal that they're sort of slowing down a little bit on that kind of thing and saying, now you guys, pick it up. And that's what the survey also says very clearly from yesterday, that it's time private sector, capital expenditure rose and so forth. However, we are stuck in this sort of loop where, because there's not enough jobs and good jobs, and labor productivity is lower in the surplus labor sector, there isn't enough demand. And if there isn't enough demand, that means capacity utilization is not going to pick up. That means investment is not going to pick up. So really breaking out of this is very hard. And you're right that no government will really lay this out in this way because the problem is going to appear insurmountable. I think, I was very encouraged in the economic survey to see a lot of talk about states. That it kept coming back to states. Now, of course, you have to put money where your mouth is. And this is where Yamini's point about the Finance Commission thing becomes relevant, that a lot of the action is at the state level, whether you're talking about regulation, local infrastructure. These are things that really matter for MSMEs, and that's where the jobs come from. So I would watch out for, are you really seriously going to put resources down below the union level into the states and the local governments? Are you going to focus on local infrastructure, not highways and airports only, but on local stuff that, which binds small firms, right, from growing?
Yeah.
That's what I would look for. Not just credit. There's a lot of talk on credit for MSMEs, but we know that doesn't work because the credit net doesn't extend all the way down to the micro enterprises to allow them to grow. So
Yeah.
you need some direct stuff like spending directly on local infrastructure, which again the states are in a much better position to do, but the union government has to give them the resources to do it. So this is my long-winded way of saying this is what I would
No, no. But I think those are two excellent points about local spending, and we actually don't know if that's if it's all just going to be left to the states. Sandeep, before we get a last round of comments on the taxes and the larger message, political message, your take. Both Yamini and Amit seem to come from a place where they believe that there is a structural problem, that the government's focus on jobs is a covert, as close as the government can get to acknowledging that there's a problem. And to that extent, that this is now a bipartisan conversation that needs to happen. I don't see it happening. We are at a very vitriolic sort of point between, in terms of relations between the government and the opposition. If I'm projecting here, so just one sentence more, if the next 3 assembly elections don't go well for the BJP, would it then begin to panic a little bit about the economics of their politics?
I suppose they will. They will. They can't ignore that. I think they're very conscious about that. Therefore, they've tried to address some of it in the budget document. But as Dhiraj said, everything can't be spelled out there. So you might find a lot more course corrections happening down the line, irrespective of the state election. But certainly, if the state elections don't go their way, they'll try to contain some of the state election, fallouts, as I said, by what they're trying to do with freebies, etc. But despite that, if they don't get it, obviously that has a bearing on the entire government's, I wouldn't call it stability, but it's, as we've already seen in the last 1.5 months, I've commented on this on Twitter, etc. Government has been in a state of suspended animation. We didn't hear much action from them. So obviously, there is some amount of rethinking, etc., going on. 2 comments, Barkha. One, taking off from Dhiraj's point on the stock markets. I think stock market, the government, again, in economic survey itself has highlighted the point that they are also worried about the stock market, the kind of bubble which seems to be forming, and a lot of people, especially youngsters, putting money into the stock market because of this very abnormal returns. I was with some bankers a little while ago, and they were talking about, the loans, and Dhiraj would know this better, which are coming from this, fintech kind of companies, which are not really bank supported. People are drawing those money without any security, and we're putting it in the stock market. If there is a bubble, there is going to be. So I think some amount of moderation, which they have done, maybe also a calculated thing. Structural issues, Yamini is right, but these are difficult ones to tackle. So I think that is where nobody would have the silver bullet on that. One thing again is happening is, contrary to some of our views, the share of non-rural income, non-farm income in the rural areas, not non-rural, non-farm, non-agricultural income has been going up. So the government trying to encourage some amount of entrepreneurship, whether through the women or self-help groups, etc., are, I think, steps in the right direction, but none of them are going to yield immediate results. So it's always this chicken and an egg thing, which will any government will have to tackle with, and that's part. Only difference is earlier BJP could brazen it out and saying that we are all moving in the right direction, Viksit Bharat and the rest of it. But now, since it has begun to hurt politically, they cannot ignore it, and they will have to put some band-aids or whatever you call it, for the immediate term. So I think this is the best Nirmala Sitharaman could have done at this juncture, given the political realities.